1964, America declared war on poverty. By 1980, poverty had dropped from 22% to 13%. Then Ronald Reagan became president. And he didn't just cut welfare spending. He invented something far more insidious. He created the poverty industry. A system where corporations make billions of dollars managing the poor, while those same poor people get less help than ever before. Today, companies like Maximus make $5 billion a year deciding who gets food stamps and health care. Private equity firms run dialysis centers that keep sick people on machines longer to maximize profit. Tax preparation companies target the poor to skim their earned income tax credits. And it all started with one man's vision in 1980. Ronald Reagan didn't just attack welfare, he privatized it. He turned poverty into a business opportunity. And the system he built, the corporate structures he invented, the profit incentives he embedded into social services, they didn't disappear when he left office. They metastasized. They spread into every corner of the safety net until helping the poor became less important than extracting profit from the poor. This isn't about whether welfare works or whether government should help people. This is about what happens when you insert a profit motive into the business of helping society's most vulnerable. Because Reagan's revolution wasn't replacing bad government with efficient markets. It was replacing direct aid with corporate middlemen, who get paid whether or not they actually help anyone. And understanding this system isn't academic, it's survival. Because if you or someone you love ever needs Medicaid, food stamps, disability benefits, housing assistance, or any form of government help, you will encounter this system. You will deal with a corporation that makes money by denying you benefits, and you need to know how we got here. Ronald Wilson Reagan was born February 6, 1911 in Tampico, Illinois. His father was an alcoholic shoe salesman. His mother was a devout Christian. This combination, the salesman's charm and the Christian's moral certainty, would define Reagan's entire approach to politics. He would gut social programs without mercy, while believing God had chosen him to free America from government dependency. This wasn't cynicism. This was genuine conviction that welfare was destroying the moral fabric of America, and that private enterprise, guided by profit, would do more good than government bureaucracy ever could. In 1976, Reagan was running for president. He needed a villain. He needed a story that would make voters hate welfare. And he found it in Chicago. A woman named Linda Taylor had been arrested for welfare fraud. The Chicago Tribune called her the welfare queen. According to the Tribune, she had 80 names, 30 addresses, drove a Cadillac, wore fur coats, and collected $150,000 a year in fraudulent benefits. Reagan seized on this story. He told it at rally after rally. "There's a woman in Chicago," Reagan would say, his voice dripping with contempt. "She used 80 names, 30 addresses, 15 telephone numbers to collect food stamps, Social Security, veterans' benefits for 4 non-existent deceased veteran husbands." The crowds would gasp, they would boo, they would chant for welfare reform. Reagan had found his weapon. The welfare queen became the face of everything wrong with government assistance. Here's what Reagan didn't tell those crowds. Linda Taylor was charged with stealing $8,000, not $150,000. She used 4 aliases, not 80. She was an outlier, a criminal, not representative of the millions of Americans who legitimately needed help. She was also suspected of kidnapping and murder, crimes far worse than welfare fraud. But Reagan never mentioned those because they didn't serve his narrative. The welfare queen wasn't real. She was a racist dog whistle. Reagan never mentioned Taylor's race, but he didn't have to. When he said woman from Chicago driving a Cadillac and wearing furs, his predominantly white audiences knew exactly who he was talking about. Black welfare recipients lazy, fraudulent, living off hard-working taxpayers. This was the foundation. The myth that welfare fraud was rampant. The belief that government assistance was being abused on a massive scale. And once Reagan established that narrative, he could justify his real agenda. Not just cutting welfare, privatizing it. In 1981, Reagan became president. His first budget, the Omnibus Reconciliation Act of 1981, made deep cuts to social programs. He slashed aid to families with dependent children. He reduced food stamp benefits. He tightened eligibility rules. He made it harder for working people to qualify for assistance. But the cuts were just the beginning. The real revolution was what came next: privatization. Reagan's philosophy was simple. Government is wasteful and inefficient. The private sector is lean and effective. Therefore, if we want to help the poor, we should let corporations do it. But corporations need profit. So we'll pay them to manage welfare programs. They'll cut costs, eliminate fraud, and deliver better services for less money. That was the theory. Here's what actually happened. Instead of giving money directly to people in need, Reagan's reforms gave money to the states as block grants. The states would then hire private companies to administer welfare programs. These companies would determine eligibility. They would process applications. They would verify employment. They would manage the entire system. And they would be paid based on how efficiently they operated. Efficiency. That's the key word. In business, efficiency means maximizing profit. You cut costs, you reduce labor, you minimize time spent on each transaction, you eliminate waste. But in welfare, waste is people. Efficiency means processing applications faster, with fewer staff, asking fewer questions, providing less support. Efficiency means kicking people off the rolls. Efficiency means denying benefits, because every person you remove from welfare is money saved, and in the private sector, money saved is profit earned. This created a fundamental conflict of interest that persists to this day. The corporations managing welfare are not incentivized to help people. They're incentivized to reduce caseloads, to deny applications, to create barriers to enrollment, to make the process so complicated and frustrating that people give up. This isn't a bug in Reagan's system. This is the feature. Because Reagan didn't actually want to help the poor more efficiently. He wanted to shrink the welfare rolls. And privatization was the perfect tool. You could claim you were modernizing government while actually just making it harder for people to get help. And you could make corporations rich in the process. Now let's look at how privatized welfare actually operates. In the mid-1990s, the United States began outsourcing large parts of its social safety net to private administrative contractors. Instead of government offices handling applications directly, states started relying on outside firms to manage enrollment systems, process paperwork, operate call centers, and verify eligibility for programs like healthcare assistance and disability services. These companies don't design policy. They don't decide who deserves help. Their role is administrative. They are hired to make large systems run faster, cheaper, and at scale. And this is where incentives matter. These contractors are paid by state governments. Their performance is measured using metrics like processing speed, operational cost, and system efficiency. The goal is to manage high volumes of applications with limited resources. Automation increases, human interaction decreases. Processes become standardized. From a business perspective, this approach makes sense. Streamlined systems reduce expenses. Reduced expenses improve contract performance, and strong performance leads to renewals and expansion into additional states. But when social services are managed this way, outcomes are shaped by structure rather than intent. Applicants experience systems that are highly procedural. Documentation requirements are strict. Timelines are short. Support is limited. Decisions are often automated. The system prioritizes consistency and speed over individual circumstances. To the person applying, it feels like interacting with the government. But behind the interface is a contracted system optimized for administrative efficiency, not personal guidance. This model expanded rapidly because it aligned with political priorities on both sides. Governments reduced internal staffing. Budgets became more predictable. Oversight shifted from outcomes to metrics, and private contractors scaled nationwide. Over time, this approach became normal. Welfare administration was no longer something governments did directly. It became something they managed through contracts. Not because it was more humane, not because it was more effective for individuals, but because it was easier to measure, easier to budget, and easier to maintain. And once this structure was in place, it didn't go away. It became the foundation for how modern assistance programs are administered today. Now multiply this across the entire social safety net. Maximus manages Medicaid in Tennessee. In 2018, the year after they took over, there was a 23% increase in uninsured children, more than any other state. Children who had been enrolled in healthcare were suddenly deemed ineligible. Maximus manages Medicaid in Kansas. After they took over, massive backlogs appeared. Elderly people, disabled people, sick people waited months for their applications to be processed. Some died waiting. Maximus took over Medicaid eligibility for the federal marketplace in multiple states. Technical problems, long wait times, lost applications. These aren't accidents, these are features. This is efficiency, this is profit maximization. And it's not just Maximus. It's every corporation in this space. Because Reagan created a system where helping fewer people is more profitable than helping more people. But Maximus is just the beginning. Let's talk about tax preparation companies. When you're poor in America, you're entitled to the Earned Income Tax Credit. This is a refund, sometimes as much as $7,000, designed to help working families. It's one of the most effective anti-poverty programs in America. But because the tax code is deliberately complicated, low-income people often can't file their own taxes, so they go to a tax preparer. Companies like H&R Block, Jackson Hewitt, and Liberty Tax specifically target low-income neighborhoods. They advertise heavily in poor communities. They promise fast refunds. They make it seem easy. What they don't advertise is the fees. These companies charge hundreds of dollars to prepare simple tax returns. They offer refund anticipation loans, which are just payday loans secured by your tax refund. They charge interest rates of 50%, 100%, sometimes more. They take a cut of your earned income tax credit, money that was meant to help you escape poverty, and keep it as profit. Liberty Tax was sued by the District of Columbia for deceiving low-income customers. The lawsuit revealed that Liberty was secretly skimming money from refunds, adding fees that weren't disclosed, charging for services that were never provided. They settled for millions of dollars. But they're still operating. They're still targeting the poor. They're still making money off the Earned Income Tax Credit. This is the Reagan legacy, taking a benefit designed to help the poor and turning it into a profit center for corporations. Let's talk about housing. Section 8 vouchers are supposed to help low-income families afford housing. The government gives you a voucher. You find an apartment. The government pays a portion of your rent. But landlords figured out they can charge whatever they want because the government will pay. A one-bedroom apartment that should rent for $1,000 gets listed for $1,800 because the landlord knows Section 8 will cover it. The Washington Post investigated this in D.C. and found the government was overpaying by $1 million a month. Taxpayer money flowing straight into landlords' pockets while the housing voucher fund gets depleted faster, meaning fewer people can be helped. This is the market at work. This is Reagan's vision. Private landlords extracting maximum profit from government programs. Let's talk about dialysis. Kidney failure disproportionately affects poor people. Since the 1970s, the government has paid for dialysis. This is life-saving. Dialysis keeps people alive while they wait for a kidney transplant. Companies like DaVita run dialysis centers. They're paid per treatment, about $380 per session, so their incentive is to maximize the number of sessions. Keep the machines running. Keep the chairs filled. Here's where it gets dark. Dialysis is supposed to be temporary. You're supposed to get a kidney transplant. But a kidney transplant means losing a customer. So for-profit dialysis centers refer patients for transplants 17% less often than nonprofit centers. They keep people on dialysis longer. These are sick people, poor people who desperately need a kidney. And they're being kept on machines because it's more profitable. DaVita has paid over $1 billion in settlements for fraud. They paid doctors to recruit patients. They billed the government for medicine they threw away. They systematically maximize profit at the expense of patient care. This is Reagan's system working exactly as designed. Let's talk about foster children. This is the most egregious example. Foster children, the most vulnerable kids in America, are entitled to Social Security benefits if they've lost a parent or are disabled. About $700 a month. This money is supposed to go to the children. Instead, states hire companies like Maximus to identify which foster children qualify for this benefit and then divert that money from the children to state coffers. Maximus gets paid $2,600 per child they find. They scour databases looking for orphaned or disabled foster children. They identify which ones qualify for Social Security. They help the state divert that money away from the child and into the general fund. Washington State diverted $689 million from foster children. Wisconsin, $4.13 million. Illinois, $18.7 million. These are children whose parents are dead, children who are disabled, the most vulnerable people in our society, and corporations are making money by taking benefits away from them. Here's what makes this so insidious. The money still goes to the foster care system, so technically it's still benefiting these children, but it was meant to go directly to them, to help with their specific needs, to give them some financial stability. Instead, it goes to the state, which uses it for general foster care expenses while a corporation takes a cut for facilitating the transfer. This is pure extraction. This is a corporation making money by moving government benefits away from children, and it's completely legal. It's Reagan's system working exactly as he intended. Now here's the defense of all this. Privatization does create efficiencies. Corporations do cut costs. They do eliminate waste. They do process applications faster than government bureaucracies. This is true. The problem is what counts as waste. A government employee might spend an hour helping someone fill out a Medicaid application. That's inefficient, but it helps someone get health care. A private contractor processes the application in 10 minutes. Very efficient. But if they miss something, if they don't catch an eligibility issue, if they deny the application because the person didn't include a document they didn't know they needed, that's a human being who doesn't get health care. Efficiency without empathy is just cruelty. And here's another consequence of this system. These corporations are extremely profitable. Maximus reported roughly $5 billion in annual revenue. Executive compensation at companies like this runs into the millions of dollars per year. All of that revenue ultimately comes from government contracts funded by taxpayers. Money that enters the system with the goal of supporting low-income Americans is partially redirected toward administrative costs, shareholder returns, and executive pay. This illustrates the core issue. Government spending didn't disappear. It was restructured. Instead of public employees administering benefits directly, layers of private contractors were inserted in between. The size of government remained large, but its function changed. Welfare was no longer just a public service. It became a managed industry. Ronald Reagan didn't eliminate social programs, and he didn't end poverty. What he helped create was a new model for administering assistance, a model where private companies oversee eligibility, compliance, and access. In this model, reducing enrollment lowers costs. Lower costs increase margins, and that creates incentives that don't always align with the goal of helping as many eligible people as possible. This approach has continued across administrations. Welfare administration became increasingly outsourced. Private contractors expanded their role in healthcare enrollment, disability determination, tax assistance, housing programs, and foster care services. Over time, an entire sector emerged around managing poverty-related programs. Today, there are significantly more federal contractors involved in social services than direct government employees. The system is deeply embedded. Even when policymakers want reform, the infrastructure is already privatized. Undoing it is complex, expensive, and politically difficult. The result is a system where public assistance still exists, but access to it is filtered through organizations whose primary responsibility is operational efficiency. Whether or not that efficiency always translates into better outcomes for vulnerable people remains an open question. But what's clear is that this structure fundamentally changed how poverty programs operate in the United States. Ronald Reagan died in 2004 at age 93. He lived long enough to see his privatization agenda spread across the country. He lived long enough to see corporations make billions from managing the poor. He lived long enough to see welfare caseloads drop dramatically. Not because poverty decreased, but because the system made it harder to get help. And he probably believed until the end that he'd done the right thing. That he'd freed America from government dependency. That he'd unleashed the power of the free market to help the poor more effectively than bureaucrats ever could. But the evidence is clear. Poverty didn't decrease under Reagan's system. It shifted. The safety net got weaker. The process got harder. And corporations got richer. The poverty industry that Reagan created is now a permanent feature of American life. Maximus, DeVita, Liberty Tax, and hundreds of other companies make billions by standing between government benefits and the people who need them. They extract profit from poverty. They make money by saying no. And it all started with one man's belief that the market could do government's job better. This is Ronald Reagan's legacy. Not welfare queens, not government waste. The poverty industry. A system where helping the poor is less important than profiting from the poor. A system where the most vulnerable Americans are treated as revenue opportunities. A system where efficiency means denial and profit means suffering. You live in this system whether you know it or not, and understanding it is the first step to changing it. Ronald Reagan created the modern poverty industry, and 40 years later, it's still extracting wealth from the people who can least afford to lose it. Welcome to Reagan's America.